This is the 454 big block I put in my 1986 square body. It used to have a 383 stroker in it, and I'm basically going to tell you every single thing that I do to put these things in there. And I'm also going to replace the axle shaft U-joint, which is that right down there, and I'm going to reroute the exhaust. I basically just got to weld a 45 onto it to get up to the manifold, because the 383 that was in here had long tube headers that went all the way down to the bottom of the frame, and these just have stock manifolds, so that I gotta route the exhaust up to the manifolds. So that's all connected and done. But when I put these in here, I think it makes it way easier personally to take the starter off and the fuel pump off. I left all the pulleys and alternator and water pump and all that on. That never really gets in the way for me, and I took the core support off, which is just 2 body mount bolts right there on each side, and take the radiator out and everything. So then instead of having to lift the engine up to the height of your chest, you can just lift that thing 2.5 feet off the ground and just push it right in. Makes it way less sketchy too. But the first thing I do when I put these in is take these motor mounts off right here, and I leave that red one on, that solid metal one that's attached to the engine block. I leave those on the engine, and you take those off. It's just 3/8 coarse thread bolts. Just use a 9/16 socket and wrench to get those off, but it makes it way easier because those red mounts, when you try to drop it in there, those mounts will get in the way that are attached to the frame, and it just makes it a huge pain trying to get everything lined up and all that. So, and take the ones off the frame, not the block, because there's bolts under there. You can't even really, you can see one, but nearly impossible to fit your fingers in there and then get a socket or a wrench in there and tighten those things down. So it's way easier just to get the ones off the frame. It's just 2 bolts on the top and 1 on the bottom. And what I like to use to lift it up in there is this lifting plate, and you just attach that to the intake manifold right where the carburetor goes. And I just always use the carburetor studs right there, and it makes it way easier. I don't like the adjustable chains and all that. I haven't really found them to work that well, but I've also have never bought nice ones, and those studs are more than strong enough to hold this engine up in the air, especially a small block Chevy too. But after I take those engine mounts off the frame, I just slide it back and get it lined up as close as I can. And for me, every single time I've ever done this, the flex plate always hits the top of the bell housing. But kind of help that out a little bit by putting it on this front hole. Put the hook and the chain in that front hole and not the middle of the back one, because that's going to help the motor lean back, so you can kind of push it and like swoop it in like that. Is pretty much what you're going to want to do. But when the flex plate ends up hitting the bell housing, I come to the front of the frame and just pry right above the fuel pump, or pry on that solid motor mount, and kind of try to push the engine hoist in while I'm doing it. And it'll usually pop right into the bell housing where it's supposed to be, and the flex plate won't be in the way anymore. But after you get all that said and done, and it's getting close to lined up, there's a peg on the engine block right there where my finger's pointing, and it goes into the bell housing on the transmission right there. And I find it way easier to get it lined up when you try to get it as close as you can using the engine hoist. And then I get under the truck, and I use my transmission jacks just so it's a little easier. But I'll jack it up from the transmission pan right here. You can use a floor jack though. And I'll jack it up and look through the frame until the transmission is lined up with the peg right there. That's where it'll go. This is a 454 going to a turbo 400, but it's the same thing with a 350 or 305, 327, anything. And same for a turbo 350 transmission too. It's all the same for mounting everything up, and an SM465 should be the same too. But after I jack up the transmission and get that peg lined up to the hole as close as I can, usually the block will be close enough to the bell housing so you can take either that bolt right there, or there's one right there too, and start threading it by hand and pull the block in closer to the bell housing on the transmission. And that just helps out a lot getting it lined up. And once you get that one bolt in, it makes the whole thing a breeze pretty much. And then you just keep pulling the block closer to the bell housing on the transmission with those bolts. There's 6 of them, 3 on each side, 1 up top on each side, and then the same on the other side with those 2 bolts there and there. And there's also a peg on the other side. That's what I found to be the fastest, easiest way. And once you get all those bolts torqued down, you gotta lift up the engine hoist again, most likely, to lift the whole engine and transmission. There's a lot more clearance than you think between the transmission and the floor of the truck where the tranny tunnel is. And even if you come in contact, it's not a huge deal, but you just gotta raise it up just enough to get these motor mounts back in there. And they slide way easier in from the bottom than the top. And I'm pretty sure when I did it on my small block, I could slide both in from the bottom because they have these little tabs on the side of them that kind of keep everything from like twisting or moving up and down. But you can slide them in from the bottom way easier than the top. But on these big blocks, on the passenger side, you can hammer them in from the bottom, but on the driver's side, you can't do that because the oil pan gets in the way. So, wouldn't recommend taking your oil pan off. Just go up top and slam it in there, and it'll be fine. And obviously, when you do this, don't have headers or manifolds on it, because those are just going to end up getting in the way and being a pain. But yeah, that's pretty much all you have to do. It's not that much work, realistically. Seems like a lot, but it is not. And then, you know, after that, it's just assembly of stuff.